Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Um, my name is Neil Marquez, and today and throughout tomorrow as well, we'll be discussing the Oregon Population Forecast Program, preliminary forecasts for counties and for UGBs. And this is for the counties of Benton, Lane, Lincoln, Lynn, Marion, and Polk County. And in addition to going over the forecast for these counties and the UGBs we're in for these counties. We're also going to be discussing the way that we got there, the other projects that are important to our city and county stakeholders, that and how we make those predominantly our estimates as well, and just sort of general trends that we've been seeing within the US, but also the state of Oregon that's influencing both our changes in population estimates and forecasts as well. So our presentation schedule for today is just this brief introduction, a review of the population estimates methods, which are generated annually in which you all participate in the generation of, the population forecast methods, which happen once every 4 years, which are the specific counties of Benton, Lane, Lincoln, Lynn, Marion, and Polk that we're going through right now, and which all of y'all are associated with. And then after that, we'll go over national and state population dynamics. What is happening with births, deaths, migration, the economy, housing across the US and Oregon, and how it's influencing our view of what we're projecting in the near future, as well as our estimates. And then after that, we'll separate into groups, and today we'll be meeting with the counties and the cities, or UGBs rather, we're in for Benton and Lane immediately following this meeting.
Anything that would. It's an online manual.
I might,
And it's the iris.
Rebecca, if I could ask, sorry, that you mute, and I just might ask that if people aren't immediately asking a question, to go ahead and mute yourself as well. Sorry about that. And then we will tomorrow be discussing Lincoln, Marion, and Polk. The two big programs that we'll be discussing today are the population estimates and the population estimates made by Portland State University Population Research Center. Cover the total resident population of all Oregon cities and counties of July 1st every year, as mandated by ORS 190. A brief schedule of how that's generated is shown there on the left, and I'm actually going to pass that over to Huda briefly to talk about the estimates program and where we're at with that and where you can find our most recent estimates. And then afterwards, I will be discussing the forecast program, which we'll be going over in much more detail with the county-specific meetings afterwards. And PSU PRC's forecast program is mandated by ORS 195, which started in 2014 or 2016 rather. And that process is shown in the right over here. And Huda and I are going to be the ones discussing today, but we're also joined by Ethan Sherrigan as well, the director. I am Neil Marquez, the population forecast manager, while I'll be discussing the population forecast, as well as Huda, who is going to be discussing the population estimates. But I also just want to make clear that we have a large team here which we go over, discuss, and help to generate the population estimates and forecast programs as well. So moment, I'm going to pass it off to Huda to talk about our population estimates program before we head back and talk about the population forecast program. So Huda, do you want to go ahead and jump on?
Thank you so much, Neil. I just would like to make sure you all can see my slides.
We can, Huda, but it looks like they're not in presentation mode yet. Just the PowerPoint application's viewable.
Yes. Okay, so now you can see them.
We have the presenter view now, so we might need to swap the views. Yeah.
Oh, maybe I can do that. Okay. So what about now?
We see your presenter view. I don't know if somebody knows. I'm not familiar with how
it's okay.
to
Okay, we
swap
can.
that. But
okay, I will stop my sharing, and I think Neil, would you please go?
If
Go
you
ahead.
open your presentation and then you could maybe.
What about now?
Yeah, got it.
Oh, okay. So, good morning. It's my pleasure to talk to you about the population estimates process. So, as mandated by Oregon law, we at Population Research Center, Portland State University, produce the annual certified population estimates for the state. It's 36 counties and 241 cities. These estimates, as we all know, is important for the decision makers, and also they are used to distribute the state revenues. The population estimates are produced annually as of July 1st, and on November 15th, we produce the preliminary estimates. And actually, we would like to announce that tomorrow, November 15, we will release the preliminary population estimates. We will publish preliminary population estimates on our website. In addition to that, we will send letters to all city managers. In letters, each city manager will have the information that we use to produce those population estimates, and then we will have like 1 month between November 15th and December 15th to receive any comments or questions. And I will let you know, I will have the email address here to ask you to send your comments or questions to that email address. But please do that as soon as possible and before we publish the certified estimates on our population on our website. In addition to that, we produce supplementary reports that are prepared and published quarterly to reflect changes in population due to annexations that happened after we prepared the population or certified population estimates. All residents of Oregon cities, counties, and unincorporated areas are included in our population estimates. In order to produce the population estimates, we use two main types of data. We use administrative data that we get from different sources, from different agencies. For example, birth and death data, school enrollment data, issue driver license data, state and the federal tax exemptions, in addition to Medicare enrollment data. Also, we use survey data. Annually reach out to our contact person at each city to request annual information from all counties and cities. Information includes annual changes in housing units, number of mobile homes, inventory of special housing units like RVs, tents, boats, and car. In addition to that, we collect data on the group quarters and people living there. I would like to thank you all our city contact persons for your prompt response to our and send the completed survey on time. We really appreciate that. We collect this data using our annual housing units and population survey. The annual housing units and population survey, as most of you know, consists of 4 main sections in addition to the reference guide. The first section, Section A, we collect data about housing units, added housing units that include new construction or converted, also lost that happened because demolitions or conversions to non-residential, in addition to that loss of housing units that happens because of any national disaster or, for example, because of the wildfires. In Section B, we collect data about the inventory of mobile homes, the number of mobile homes that move into the city, inside the city limit, or out of the city limit, and the number of persons living there if this data is available. In Section C, we collect data on inventory of special housing units. As I mentioned, that include RVs, tents, boats, and also if the data on number of population who are living there is available, it's also we also appreciate if the city can provide this data. In Section D, we collect data on group quarters. By group quarters, for example, people who are living in nursing homes, in jails, or in dorms of the universities. Also, annexations. We keep monitoring city annexations throughout the year, as I mentioned, to produce the supplementary reports or quarterly reports. As soon as we receive notification about new annexation from the Office of the Secretary of the State, we reach out to the city that has this new annexation with our annexation survey. In this annexation survey, we collect data about housing units like by type, single, multifamily units, and also we collect data if these housing units are vacant or occupied, and we collect data if there are any mobile homes inside this annexation or any group quarters. And as I mentioned, those annexed population is added to the previously certified population in the quarterly reports. In order to produce or to estimate the state and the county population, we use two methods. We use the cohort component method and the ratio correlation method. The cohort component method mainly uses the natural changes, which is births minus deaths, and net migration, number of immigrants minus out migrants. The ratio correlation method models changes in household population as a function of changes in some variables. For example, school enrollment, medical enrollment, state, federal income tax exemptions, issued driver license, and employment. In order to produce sub-county or cities estimates, we use the housing unit method, where housing changes are translated to household population counts. We use some information on vacancy rate and the average household sizes, which we get from the most recent annual American Community Survey, in addition to the most recent census. And then we combine those with group quarters population changes to compute total population change. To clarify how we produce population estimates at the city level, we start by the population from the 2020 census as our base. And then we add net housing unit change and the net group quarters population change that happened between the census date, which is April 1st, 2020, and June 30, 2020. In addition to that, we apply the average household size and the vacancies rate for that period. Now, we will be able to get population estimates as the 1st of July, 2020. And then we do the same. We apply net housing units changes, net group quarter population changes that happened between July 1st, 2020 and July 30, 2021, and apply average household size and the vacancy rate for that period to be able to produce July population estimates as of July 2021, and so on. And now, tomorrow, you will see the results for the July 1st, 24 population estimates. Population estimates timeline. Annually, by end of May, between end of May and mid of June, we reach out to all cities to ask or to update our contact persons if they would like to change or keep that person. And then by mid of July, we reach out to this person with our annual housing units and population survey. Actually, since last year, we have the survey as an online survey. So we send the link to the survey to our contact person. And then by November 15, we produce preliminary estimates. By December 15th, we publish the certified estimates. We don't send the letters for the certified estimates. We just send the letters with the preliminary estimates. And then by April 15th, we publish annual report. The annual report includes but some more information in addition to the certified population estimates. We produce component data on the component of changes at the county level, in addition to the population composition by age and sex, also at the county level. With each new release of the annual estimates, the entire time series of the estimates is revised for all years back to the beginning of the decade. And we believe we do that to reflect the increased availability of data, specifically, as you know, what happened in shortage of data because of the COVID-19 period. These revisions, we believe, increase the accuracy of net changes since the census date. But we would like to ensure that when we go back and revise the estimates for the previous years, we keep the certified estimates table for those previous years as they are. So please don't link the revised estimates for the previous years to the annual certified estimates that were published annually, and we don't change them. We keep them. So if you have any comments or questions generally regarding the population estimates, or after we publish the preliminary estimates tomorrow, please reach out to us. Here is our email address, bobest@pdx.edu. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Huda. I appreciate that. And as Huda mentioned, those updated estimates for 2024 will be on our website tomorrow, correct, Huda?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so be sure to find them there. Now we'll be shifting over to discussing the PSU PRC forecast cycle, which I am the forecast program manager. And so again, just mentioning Oregon revised statutes for area population forecasts. So the forecast in Spirit are generated for the purposes of city and land use planning, generating these population forecasts for both counties and for cities. The specific mandate tied to the ORS is tied for planning of specifically the urban growth boundaries. And so for this purpose, we forecast for urban growth boundaries within counties and the areas outside of urban growth boundaries rather than city boundaries. So that's an important distinction to keep in mind when we're talking about these forecasts. And that's because the numbers that are used for the population forecasts correspond specifically to the UGB, specifically looking at over the next 20 years, does the UGB within the UGB boundaries accommodate enough room for the population of the city to grow into over the next 20 years? And if it doesn't, this is grounds for expansion of the current city's UGB as well. And so this is why we're tied to the UGB boundaries rather than the city boundaries. Some other stipulations about these forecasts is that these forecasts must be updated at least once every 4 years. The last time that we published forecast for the counties in this region, Region 4, was in 2021, which was an interesting time period. This was the first time that we had just updated the forecast, taking into account some of the dynamics of COVID. The census had not yet been released, even though it was 2021 at the time. And so this is the first time that we're able to account for that. So you'll see some big changes since the last time that we've made these population forecasts. And all the graphs I've been sure that we show population forecast, I'm going to also show the forecast that we made last time, so you can see where the county or the city compares, and we can talk about what's changing those dynamics as well. So we're required to cover a 50-year forecast horizon. The statute horizon is 20 years, but we forecast out to 50 years as well for other land use and city planning purposes as well. It's supposed to include the most up-to-date data, so a big process every year is that we get new information regarding births, deaths, migration, and population and housing and economic change to incorporate into our forecast so that we're always using the latest information to generate our forecast as well. We need to allow at least for one meeting for public input and objections. We have now expanded out to 2 meetings. We find it helpful that we can have this preliminary meeting to show our initial sets of forecast, and then to be able to work with cities and counties over the next few months in terms of revising these forecasts so that we can get to an area that we're all under agreement for population forecasts for both the county and UGBs as well. We'll then go into a second review period later on in the cycle, and those meetings will be held in person on site at counties and cities within the region. So we'll travel out to y'all guys for this one, but for this preliminary one, it's all on Zoom. And then methods and results, of course, will be publicly available. Our preliminary estimates as well will be posting onto our website next week, all of our preliminary numbers, so that you can see, as well as the slides and the recording for these conversations as well. So where are we in this cycle? Well, this is region 4, so this is the last update for this 4-part Oregon State program. In 2025 is when we're producing the 4th set of coordinated UGB and county forecasts. This is the map showing the regions from 2022 to 2025 of where we're producing, and then in 2026 we'll start over again with region 1. But here we're in the region 4 set of forecasts for Benton, Lane, Lincoln, Lynn, Marion, and Polk. Starting last year, we also produced forecast for Oregon tribal lands populations as well. These somewhat coordinate with the county population forecast as well. But because tribal land groups go across multiple county boundaries as well, we have them siphoned off or sectioned off as a separate set of forecasts as well. We won't be discussing those today, but I did want to bring those up for those of you who are connected to tribal lands populations you might have of interest as well. The groups that we're forecasting for in this cycle in particular are the Siletz Reservation as well as the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and the Susla reservations. So I mentioned that, every year we have this cycle, and we are still on the early side of this cycle. In July and August, we have spent our time updating data and updating methodology where it is necessary in order to accommodate changes in population dynamics and things that we might have missed in previous years. In September, we prepare for these preliminary levels of forecast. These are generating the forecast at the county and the UGB level, reviewing the initial set of forecasts, making adjustments where necessary, and then setting it up together, these slides and presentations, reaching out to y'all, sending the surveys and everything. And then in October through December, which here we are now, distribute these the surveys, which for those of you who have responded, I appreciate. And for those of you who haven't, those are going to be open throughout November and part of December as well. So we're still open to receiving those surveys, and they really do help us in informing our understanding of population growth, especially with respect to major industries that are coming into the UGB or the city or the county even that might change the trajectory of population growth, as well as housing projects that are on the horizon that haven't completed yet, but will be completed in the next decade or so that are going to be altering the projections as well. And this is also when we're holding this first public meeting, which we're in now. Through January and March, we analyze survey responses and update UGB forecast as well as the county forecast, mostly adjusting migration and UGB forecasts as well. In this time period, births and deaths, we don't really change as often in these conversations, but we're open more to changing migration and the UGB forecast corresponding to that as well. And then in February, Marchish, we release our proposal set of forecasts and hold our second public meetings. These ones will be hybrid, in person and on Zoom, and will be in the counties at which we're discussing as well. So be on the lookout. We'll be posting and sending out meetings probably at the beginning of next year on when those will be, and they'll be within your counties as well. And then in April, May, we'll begin review the appeal period for counties and cities who make appeals and processes for review. I will say that the process for changing population forecasts is much more difficult at that period. Here we're a little bit freer to make changes and discuss the population forecast dynamics between now and March. So we're hoping to get most of our big issues settled between now and March, and then to settle the small stuff between March and May in that discussion. And I know for some of you in this group who were part of the forecast cycle last time, we did have a review and adjustment period that was pretty substantial. And so we're hoping to, it's okay that that happens. We're hoping to just push that off to the beginning of the cycle rather than April and May of when it occurred last time, so that those adjustments happen earlier and we're all aware of why those adjustments are happening rather than later. And then in June, we issue the final population forecast and publish our final reports and supplemental data as well. So our general process, which I'll go into in a little bit in a bit more detail later, but we gather information about existing and planned future housing and about population change. And I talk about populations, we're talking about migration, births, and deaths, going back at least till 1990 or about 30 years, and accounting for impactful events that we know alter this, such as COVID-19 and the economic recession, We send out general and housing surveys, which you should have received. And again, thank you for filling those out, for those of you who have, in order to account for things that are happening on the ground that we might not know about, as well as housing developments, both the current status, how has housing looked in the past 30 years, but also what are future plans for new housing developments, construction of new group quarter facilities that are happening within the area. These are non-traditional housing units such as school dormitories or carceral settings as well. And we had taken into account economic trajectories as well of counties and cities as well. We develop demographic models, both at the county and UGB levels, to account for population change and make assumptions about future housing and population change. And it's important that we note that, like, these are the assumptions that we're making, you know, because assumptions have to be made in population forecast. It's not just about the data, it's also about what are we embedding into these forecasts in terms of what we expect to happen in the coming years, so that we want to be clear about these assumptions as well, so that we're all on the same basis. And sometimes those assumptions need to be adjusted, and that's okay too. But we want to be clear about what our baseline assumptions are, and I'll go into those when we get and dig into the more of the methods. And I do want to point out, you know, just like the estimates process, which revises every year and goes back and revises past estimates against new data, we also regularly revise our forecast as well in light of new data and new information that we get. So a lot of this comes from the survey responses and the information that you give to us as counties and cities as well. But it's also why you're going to see big changes from 4 years ago when we last made population and projections for these counties and how those have developed. And I'm going to be sure to talk about the national and state level trends that are informing our reasons for changing the forecast as well. So we're not the only ones that make population projections. You might also see population projections from the Department of Administrative Services that makes Oregon Department of Administrative Services that makes population projections for the state of Oregon as a whole. They produce demographic populations for all of Oregon, and we produce a demographic forecast for the counties and sub counties, the UGBs, we're in. So that's their role versus our role. And then again, to make things more complicated, Metro makes their own set of forecasts for the Metro region, which none of these counties are a part of, but you know, transit is impacted by, and commutes are impacted by. And so like population growth in a place like potentially like Yamhill might also impact these counties as well. So we consult with Metro on their population forecast and make sure that we're on the same page with our general understanding of where demographics are going in the coming years. And we also look to the United States Census Bureau as well, who makes national as well as state level population projections. So you might see Oregon level population projections for them. This is all to say that we're not the only group that makes population projections, but we do look to these other groups to make sure that we're all in the same trend. And so we're not independently making these forecasts. We consult with on a regular basis these groups as well, and you will see different numbers out there. But you know, our forecasts are predominantly for the land use and UGB boundaries planning as well, and for state and city planning. And that differs a little bit from the use cases of other locations for non-metro counties as well, and non-metro UGB. Great, and I'm going to move on to the little bit more detailed population forecast methodology. And I do want to say, I'm sorry I didn't say this before, but if you do have a question, you know, Ethan wrote this, go ahead and put it in the chat and we'll get to it. I'm happy to answer questions at any point. And I know a lot of you are probably really just interested in your own counties as well. And so totally understand that as well. But it's important we go over this. So the modified methodology, we use a mixture of cohort component and housing unit models to produce forecasts. The cohort component model uses births, deaths, and migration events to balance out population change over time. And we do this by demographic components. Namely, we produce populations by age, so that you can see changing age dynamics, which is an important component of our population forecast, and one that we're going to be talking about quite a bit. The aging process that happens within Oregon has been happening, is going to continue to happen. Sex, so that we have these sex differentials in there, that is also important, a little bit more consistent over time, but still good to have. And recently, as of starting last or 2 years ago rather, we have started producing population projections by race and ethnicity as well. We produce them by broad groups: Asian and Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Black, White, and Hispanic. And these groups are mutually exclusive, crosswalked over so that you're one of these, every one individual falls into one of these 5 groups. And the way that we do the cohort component method is pretty simple at its base. It simply says that any given population at time t is a function of the population at t-1. So the population in 2020 is equal to the population in 2019 plus the births that happen minus the deaths plus net migration. So this is exactly like the estimates program as well, except that we're not getting data to inform where this is coming from. It's data informed rather, but we're using models to fill in the gaps, you know, or fill in the future years, what we expect to happen in terms of births, deaths, and net migration as well. And specifically, what we model is the birth rate, the number of births that happen amongst the female aged population 15 to 50, which we can describe in terms of the total fertility rate. Deaths as a death rate, which we can talk about in terms of life expectancy, and the general trends that we're seeing for those is for births, both number and rate of births in Oregon are decreasing. The number of births that are happening in most counties, if not all, are declining, and that's a function of both aging of the population as well as people are having less kids over their lifetime than they had in previous years. And we can go into some of the numbers across Oregon in a little bit. And for deaths, for life expectancy, we're seeing that although life expectancy is now picking back up in the post-pandemic era, that people are living longer lives than they were a few years ago, that the number of deaths are actually increasing, and this is a function of population aging. We just simply have a larger population who is age 65 and older, and more mortality events are occurring because of this older age of population. For migration, we model an expectation that future migration is going to look similar to past migration. The average of past migration is the most likely scenario moving forward. This is overruled when we think the working age population is going to be too small to sustain the economy that has generally been within this area. So you will see a few counties where we see expecting an uptick in order to sustain the current number of jobs that are required in those areas. For for urban growth boundary populations, we use a housing unit method where it's similar, not looking at the specific population drivers, but rather saying that a population at time t is equal to population at t-1 plus the change in the housing units times the population per household times the occupancy rate. So this is really driven by how much are we seeing housing unit growth and its relationship to population change within UGB areas. So for some UGBs that have seen, or counties as well, that have seen slow housing unit growth, we're going to see slower population growth expectations for our initial set. This is something, again, that we're happy to overrule and change moving forward, but it's something that we're looking for input as well as we go into the details for specific counties and UGBs and reviewing this process. And just so you know, we all know what those numbers are. The persons per household is simply among the occupied households there are. You know, how many people live within there. Occupancy rate is the number of households that are currently occupied versus the total number of households. And the change in housing units is the number of new housing units that occurred between any 2 time periods as well. I should also mention that on there as well, contributing to total population, but not necessarily population change, is the group quarter population. This is the population that lives outside of housing units, again, as I'd mentioned, in non-traditional living quarter situations. And our expectation there, our assumption there, and again, this is one that you know, we're happy to change, is that the current group quarter population, whether it be a school or a carceral setting or nursing home or something like that will remain stable over time. And we know for certain university populations, this has been growing. For others, it's been slightly declining. But our baseline assumption is that it should stay the same. And part of the discussion today and over the next few months is like, how should that change, if at all, right? And so UGB forecasts are then adjusted to match the total county level forecast. So we put a bit more faith into the cohort component method and then adjust our UGB forecast so that those numbers are in harmony with each other. And this is a way to incorporate the demographic trends that we have data for at the county level into the UGB forecast where we don't necessarily have that level of information by age, sex, race, and ethnicity as well. So we use a number of data sources in order to make these population forecasts. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over them, but they're there for you to review as well if you want to check out the slides after, but know that they come from a number of sources, both national, such as the Census Bureau, and state level, such as Oregon Health Authority and things like that. Just so you know, embedded into our assumptions for mortality and fertility, we have smooth age patterns so that people aged 20 to 25 are going to have, women aged 20 to 25 will have a similar number of kids at age 25 and 30, and so on and so forth, that you're not going to see big jumps in those age patterns. And the same thing for mortality as well. Death at one age group looks similar to death at another age group. Mortality rates will continue to decline. And another way of saying that is life expectancy will continue to increase over time. We had a little bit of an anomalous period due to COVID, but it seems to be bouncing back. At the same time, fertility rates will continue to decline. We've seen large declines over the past 5 years that were in part exacerbated by COVID, but even pre-COVID, we saw these trends going into the population. And so fertility rates will decline over time. And just want to say that we also account for GQ populations when we're calculating fertility, because we know that the fertility rates of, for example, students tend to be very different from non-student populations as well. So this is an important thing to take into account. And this pattern will be shared across counties. Counties, of course, are going to differ in their fertility and mortality rates, and we take into account that, but there's not going to be like huge outliers in counties, and the general trend is going to be same for most counties as well. For migration counts are expected to be similarly observed to what has been observed in the past, and we adjust in some places, which adjust for the working age population. Counties, rather, though, our migration is forecasted independently from one another, so we don't have these similar ideas of that like it's going to be the same way of mortality and fertility as well. And we also account for mobile GQ populations so that we don't see huge shifts in age structure due to GQ populations, such as for school age populations or when there's a big change in a carceral expansion, for example. For housing unit changes, we assume that near-term housing unit development will be similar to what has been recently observed, as I mentioned before, and long-term development will be more similar to long-term averages. We adjust for anomalous periods of housing development, which are impacted by wildfires, large public work projects, things along those lines, where we have anomalous high growth or lack of growth for housing units as well. And GQ populations are expected to remain stable. And again, these are all our baseline assumptions, but we make adjustments where necessary based on the discussions that we have and where data show that actually this assumption is not valid for a particular location, but it's good to go over what the baseline is and so that we know where we're starting from. Okay, and I'm just going to move over to national and state trends, which are informing our population projections and certain things to think about. So first, looking at life expectancy in the United States has generally been increasing, but we saw a big decline when it came to COVID. And the United States, compared to other OECD countries, such as Western European countries, Canada, things like that, tends to have a lower life expectancy. People live for a less amount of time compared to other OECD countries. But we saw COVID really impact that in terms of life expectancy. And we've seen some bounce back, but even as of last year, we had about a 2-decade drop in life expectancy, where our life expectancy in 2022 is pretty similar to what it was as in 2002. And so losing a lot of progress in terms of life expectancy. It's bouncing back to some degree, but we haven't recovered to what we were at 2019 just quite yet. And even more importantly, with relation to fertility rates, is that fertility rates have been on the decline, and this got exacerbated again by COVID. You can see this bigger drop here, but the general trend in the United States is that fertility rates have been on the decline as well and are expected to continue to decline. So the average woman is expected to have, 1.62 children right now. That's a fudge of the numbers a little bit if you know what period fertility rates are, but just, bear with me if you do know what that is. So about 1.62 children. And if you're familiar with Oregon, you know that it's lower than that even for Oregon as well, and has been on the decline as well. And how is this impacting our understanding of what the future of the US is going to look like as well? Well, the Congressional Budgeting Office has made updated population projections as of 2023, where 2023, where they're forecasting that by 2042, or by 2042, that there will be more deaths in the US than births. And so natural change, that process of births versus deaths, is going to be leading to population decline in the United States. And the only reason we're going to see population growth is from international migration, net migrants coming into the US, spurring population growth, overcoming this births minus deaths. And again, if you're familiar with Oregon, you know that as of 2020, the number of births over deaths has been in the negative since 2020. Right, as well. But this is, so Oregon's ahead in terms of that like negative population impact that's happening between natural change, between births and deaths. And this is kind of startling in terms of what was expected in previous years, right? What I'm showing here is census long-term US population forecasts projected in 2012, 2014, 2017, and then again in 2020. And the important thing to take away from this is not any specific number, but rather our expectations of what future growth, or rather the US Census Bureau's expectations for what future growth are going to look like, have drastically shifted in just a relatively short period of time. In the 5-year period between 2012 and 2017, you can see a decline in the forecast for sure, but that pales in comparison between the difference between what we saw in 2017 and 2023 in terms of adjustments in the population projections. And a similar thing is happening within Oregon as well in terms of our expectations of what future populations are going to look like. And so in Oregon, what we've seen in recent years is this major slowing down in population growth. Oregon, PSU PRC is still estimating that Oregon as a state is growing, and certainly that counties within, are still experiencing growth, but that growth is much slower than what we've observed in the past 50 years in terms of population growth as well. And so these numbers, a little bit hard to see here, show the annualized population growth over 10-year periods and then a 3-year period. And this is standardized so that you can compare 3-year and 10-year periods. And you can see since 2000, it's been on the decline, in terms of growth, 1.83%, 1.13%, 1%. But in recent years, it's been pretty slow, 0.4% growth over the past 3. I haven't updated this for the 2024 numbers, but they definitely will be around that as well. So this slowing in growth that's happening across the US is even happening to a greater degree within Oregon. And the biggest driver of that is post 2020. On average, we've had in any given year more deaths than births. So we're experiencing population decline in terms of natural change, and that's expected to continue to happen. And again, of course, counties are going to have variation. This isn't true for all counties, but across Oregon as a whole, this is the case. But in addition to that, we've seen less migrants than we've seen in any other 5-year period prior to this. So again, not updated to reflect the more recent numbers as we're finalizing those. But you can see that the number of migrants post 2020 is lower than what we've observed in previous years. And we expect that to bounce back. Migration is much more, has a lot more variation in annual change. So that's quicker to bounce back and make changes. But this natural change that's occurring, you can see a pretty steady trend downward And that is not expected to make a bounce back in the same sort of way. So this is just the future of Oregon that we're thinking about, is one that is having more deaths, less births, older age population as well. So that's important to think about in terms of our expectations for growth. And looking specifically at life expectancy and total fertility rate here, you can see the impact for Oregon. Historically, life expectancy has been growing. You know that probably you probably know that Oregon has a higher life expectancy than the United States as a whole, but that greatly was impacted by COVID. And we have seen an increase, and this data is only going back to 2022. We haven't finalized numbers for 2023 yet, but we're still about that 20-year lag in terms of, or rather 15-year lag for Oregon in terms of life expectancy. And we think we're making that back slowly but surely, but it's still lagging behind from what we saw in 2018 and 2019, right? For fertility rates, though, fertility rates have been on the decline for quite some time now, again, exacerbated by COVID. But the expectation here is that fertility rates are going to continue to decline. And I mentioned, that in the US, it's about 1.6 births per woman. In Oregon, it's closer to 1.3. And again, lots of county variation there, but a lot of counties have lower than this as well. So important to think about for that impact in terms of population growth. I think that kind of sounds a little negative, so I do want to point out some interesting positive population growth aspects as well. Is that historically population growth and employment, income, and GDP has usually grown faster than the rest of the U.S. So as a share of the total of the population of the U.S., we've been on an increase historically that's dropped a little bit post-COVID, but we have beaten out employment and GDP expectations for the past couple of years. So this is a positive sign as well, leading to indications that we may see some population growth in the coming years, both in the forms of migration, but also one of the aspects of fertility that's really important to talk about as well is people citing economic concerns for having kids as well. So we might see, and we have seen a little bit in 2024 as well, a little bit more bounce back in fertility. People had more kids than they had in 2023. So an important thing to think about is just like the state of the economy, but as well as housing and things like that and its impact. And speaking of housing, I'd be remiss to say, pointing out annual housing production as well. As many of you know, COTEC really set out this ambitious goal of hitting 36,000 new housing units annually in the coming years to overcome this housing deficit that Oregon has been burdened by historically. And I do want to point out, that the expansions of the housing program across the state of Oregon that have occurred have led to increases in population and housing production that we haven't seen since before the big housing bubble burst in 2007. So we're seeing increases in numbers of housing growth. Obviously we were impacted by COVID a bit, and we're still far off from that 36,000 mark. But it's important to note that we are seeing housing growth in areas again that we haven't seen historically in quite some time. So that's another important aspect that we'll be sure to consider. And I'd again love your feedback from in terms of individual cities as well, in terms of future housing production and near-term housing production as well. So the next portion, is the county and UGB updates. And just while you're all here, before we go over this, some of them are going to be today, some will be tomorrow. If you're Benton and Lane, you're today. If you're part of the other counties, you'll be tomorrow. Is that for each of these counties, we'll review county level drivers of population change, review the county level forecast and what's driving those forecasts in terms of births, deaths, and migration, and how it's impacting the age structure, as well as the population diversity, racial and ethnic diversity as well. And after we do that at the county level, we'll go into a UGB review and review the current population and housing trends. An important aspect of that as well for the review is the UGB boundaries. Again, we're not talking about city boundaries, we're talking about UGB boundaries, which are going to be different. So we have maps in here to review the UGB boundaries for all of those in attendance to make sure that we have those correct boundaries.
It was nice. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
and the UGB forecast as well will be the last one. And we'll compare the forecasts to the growth rates of the county as a whole, the region as a whole, as well as the US in there as well. So you can see comparatively, because you know, we're going to see that like population growth has declined since the last time that we've made these forecasts as well, taking into current trends. But how does this compare to other areas as well as across the United States, to give a little context on what's happening? And then we want to know from your end, and we'll say from our end what we think is driving these forecasts, and what aspects we'd love to hear from you, are missing from the current forecast. And some of that is included in the survey. And again, thank you one more time, because I know it's time consuming, those of you who have filled out those surveys. But giving us information about new industries, new employment that's happening in an area, large public work projects that are coming up that are either going to accelerate or decelerate population growth, upcoming housing developments, or expansion in group quarters. So these are the things that we're looking to discuss as well into there, or you know, just some discussion about our baseline assumptions of what goes into the population forecast. You're welcome to ask questions now or during the county specifics as well. But I also want to let you know, we don't want to limit questions to just this time period. You're welcome to reach out to us at any time. Our general email address is at askprc@pdx.edu. And you can always reach out to there if you are unsure who your question should be directed to. Is this an estimates question? Is this a projections question? We'll filter it to the right person and you'll get the right response. If you want to talk directly about the population projections, I'll include my email in there as well. So that you can reach out to me, especially for these counties that we're making projections for. And then next week, we'll post this conversation, this presentation, the conversations we'll have with the counties, these slides, and the new numbers in Excel sheets on our website at population research at pdx.edu/population research population forecasts on there as well. So happy to answer any questions now. I know, you know, this is a long meeting, and you know, we have another long meeting coming up with a specific review. So if you want to hold your county specific questions for then, totally understand. But we have a few minutes. If there's anything you'll want to ask, happy to answer.
Neil, I had a question about the race ethnicity categories. So
yeah,
would I be understanding it right that all Hispanic people of all races are in the Hispanic category, and then it would really be like white non-Hispanic, black non-Hispanic?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And you know, I didn't go into specific methods in specific detail, so happy to answer questions like that. And that's in our methodology report as well. But you're exactly right. This is how we crosswalk populations over. If you mark Hispanic, it's considered an absorbing state, is how the Census Bureau refers to it. So it's the other populations are non-Hispanic, that group. For multiracial populations, we look at surveys of people who identify as multiracial, which multiracial categories they respond as, and what they consider as their primary race group as well. And we probabilistically crosswalk over individuals who are multiracial to match into those groups as well in there. So that's how we get into a single group as well. We have talked about the potential, you know, this is for purposes of tracking fertility and mortality changes as well, because we can't get really specific detailed mortality and fertility, and as well as migration trends for very detailed multiracial groups. But you know, we have also talked about the possibility of crosswalking back to multiple groups in the future as well. So if that's something that you're interested, we don't do that now, but it is something that we have been talking about.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And for those of you who are here for Benton, you're more than welcome. It's the same Zoom link to stay on, and we can just shift over to that. For everyone else, if you're not part of Benton County and you don't have any follow-up questions, you're welcome to leave. Again, we'll go ahead and put up these recordings and everything on the website, but please do come back for your other county specific meetings either today or tomorrow. And you should have all gotten calendar invites for that as well. So I'm going to stop the recording right now.